Hi, my name is Noah, and this is Carlos. And Carlos is here to talk about what it was like to deal with drug addiction and alcoholism. So the first question is, so how long were you an addict for?
I was an addict for 10 years and an alcoholic.
At what age did you start doing drugs or start to drink at?
I started doing drugs. I was introduced to marijuana at the age of 16, and I didn't start drinking until I was 19 years old.
Um, why did you start doing these drugs?
When I started doing marijuana, it was more to kind of fit in the environment that I was in. Um, I had a brother I looked up to, a twin brother, so I wanted to be a little bit like him. And little by little, marijuana became a gateway drug. By the age of 17, I was addicted to PCP. By the age of 18, I was addicted to marijuana, PCP, and ecstasy. By the age of 20, I was addicted to everything else I mentioned and crack cocaine.
When did addiction just start to control your everyday lifestyle?
I would say it didn't start off immediately. When I first started doing drugs, um, I dropped out of high school and I got two jobs. And, I used to justify that my life was good because I wasn't homeless or, I still had money in the bank. But I would say that addiction really started to control my day to day life by the age of maybe 22, 23 years old.
How did drug abuse affect the people around you?
It affected big time. It affected my mother the mostly. Um, my kids, I have two kids. Um, not knowing if I was gonna come home or not picking up the phone for my family. They had them very worried. They would call hospitals to see if I was in the hospital or not, or if I was dead, or if I was in jail. So at the end of the day, the people who care about me the most are the people who I affect the most, and that's my kids, my sister, brother, and and mother and father.
Did your health deteriorate at all?
Uh, I'm not gonna say that I would end up in the hospital, but I one of the things that was started to happen doing because I did drugs so much is that my teeth started to deteriorate. I started getting a lot of cavities or um, a lot of black stains on my teeth, and I wouldn't care because addiction had me at its grips.
So what made you want to change?
That's a good question. On October 19th of 2009, I found myself behind a hotel with nowhere else to go, and a friend of mine had mentioned something to me about a treatment center out in Chantilly, Virginia called A and B, and there's a detox place there, and my idea was to go in there for a whole week and kind of get like a tune up. And what I mean by the tune up is brush my teeth, take a shower, get fed, and then after 7 days, go back to what I was doing. So I checked in on October 19th of 2009, and October 20th was my first day sober, and I haven't drank since then. I'll call it a miracle from God, because I didn't go into any intention to stop quitting. Um, some people from Alcoholics Anonymous were there, and they talked to me, and I did what they told me to do, and ever since then, I haven't had a desire to drink or do drugs.
So how difficult was it to quit?
Very difficult, very difficult. Um, one of the hardest things about recovery and stop using and drinking is one of them is getting away from your old friends. That was probably one of my toughest things to do. And secondly, it's when you get sober. And my personal experience was that I had to deal with me now. I couldn't blame anybody else. It was more like, Alcoholics Anonymous has 12 steps, and the first step is admitting that you have a drinking problem and that you have a drug problem. And once you're able to concede that to yourself and saying, all right, I have a problem with alcohol or drugs or whatever the choice of addiction that you may have, it starts there. I think that once you're able to do that, and then to me, looking at myself and saying, look at all the harm that I did, family, broken relationship, no trust. Working on myself was probably the hardest thing because I had to evaluate myself and say, I'm a pretty shitty person. when I'm drinking and drugging. So to me, that was probably one of the most hardest things to do was just look at myself and say, man, it's easier to go drink and do drugs. 'Cause I don't have to think about this. I don't have to face all my troubles. But being sober, that's one of the biggest things you got to do is looking back at the things you did and learn from them.
What was your health like quitting?
So one of the biggest things, being out there, I remember when I first checked into to treatment, they take you to go do, all these tests and HIV tests and all that. And, one of the biggest things that came in my mind was, the HIV, being out there and, just being an addict, you do kind of stupid things. And glad to say I don't have AIDS or anything like that. But, that was one of my biggest concerns when I first took any type of physical or, how bad my health was. At the end of the day, all my screenings came back okay. The biggest thing was my teeth. My teeth were pretty bad. So
What was the hardest part of the recovery process?
the hardest part, admitting that I have an addiction, and that I have to do certain things to stay sober. And I think that's where it starts. You have to admit that you have a problem.
How did you keep yourself from like relapsing or any of that stuff?
So I continue to ensure my sobriety, and I continue to do what I was told to do. The first day that I was in detox, and I pray every morning, and every morning I get on my knees and I ask my higher power to keep me sober, and then at the end of the night I say thank you. I go to a meeting. When I first got sober, my first between my first and third year, between those, I went to a meeting every day. There was no excuses. There was no, hey, I can't make it. I picked up a sponsor who would kind of call me out if I didn't want to go to a meeting, say, hey, you got to go to a meeting. Today, I have 8 years of sobriety, and I still do what I did when I first came in. I still have a sponsor. I still work with another alcoholic. I still go to meetings. I still pray. I stay involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. I came to find out that there's a lot of people out there who have the same problems like me with drug addiction, and I've noticed that they do everything I do and they haven't drank neither. So I continue to follow that path because I believe in it. I'm there at free will, but nobody's holding me and say, you got to come back. I do it because my life has gotten so much better. I mean, I came from being homeless to having a pretty good life now. I don't have those big problems that I used to have before, and I like this lifestyle that I live now compared to what it was before. This is the easiest way out. Being sober. This is what it's all about. Addiction, it's tough. Because you have to put a lot of work into it. You have to, get your friends or who has money and, going to jail. There's so much involved in it that being sober, all I have to do is get up in the morning, pray, go to work, treat others with kindness, come home, go to a meeting, be with my family, and pray at the end of the night and say thank you, and then do it all over again. That to me is so much better than being out late at night, doing drugs, drinking, going to jail. So,
So what do people need to know about addiction and recovery?
First, we could go to it again. You have to admit that you have a problem. Some people have to realize that, like me, when I first got introduced to marijuana, I remember my sister told me, this is a gateway drug, and I said, well, it's not for me. And by what I mean by a gateway drug is meaning that it opens a gate to other drugs. Start there. It's not like addiction takes over you in one day. It takes time. Your tolerance for drugs just continues to go up and up and up. You have to self-evaluate yourself at the point where you're saying, hey, do I really have a drug problem? To me, if you have to ask yourself, do you have a drug problem? You have a drug problem, because most people don't go around on a day-to-day basis saying, hey, man, do I have a drug problem? It just doesn't correlate to them. They don't have to think about that kind of stuff. Where to me, I always tell myself, man, am I going to be able to stop drinking ever? That's when I knew I had a problem. So first is identifying. Now to the recovery part, it's something that you can't stop doing. You have to do it religiously. You know, going to meetings, calling your sponsor, reading the literature, doing the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, or you could do the NA, which is Narcotics Anonymous. They have the same similar steps, just different wording. You have to stay involved. You know, last meeting that I went to was on Wednesday. I don't go to as many meetings. I probably go to 3 or 4 meetings now with 8 years of sobriety, but I always make sure that I go. I always make sure that I call my sponsor when my mind tells me, hey, it's a good idea to go drink today, because my mind still tells me that. And with the tools that I've been given in Alcoholics Anonymous, I pick up the phone and I call my sponsor. I say, hey, man, this is what my mind is telling me, and we'll talk about it. And you know, the reason why I have a sponsor, because he'll ask me questions like, hey, did you watch a movie that had alcohol in it? Or did you watch a commercial that, you know, you really didn't pay much attention to, but it had something to do with alcohol? You know, little things like that trigger my mind. And I always share this. Most people, when they go to like AutoZone, when they see a tire gauge, they think about putting air on their tires. I think about smoking crack cocaine out of it. What I mean by that is that my mind is triggered to think so bad, so negatively, that's my disease talking to me and saying, hey, I'm still here. Don't forget that I can still get you. And my part, I gotta continue to fight it and go to meetings and call my sponsor and stay involved.
Yeah. Well, those are all the questions. Thank you so much, Carlos.
Yep, no problem.